welcome to Macros with Mythili, the ET Now show that takes a hard look at all the major macroeconomic issues and developments in India and overseas. In this episode, we're going to take a hard look at what is undoubtedly the biggest tax reform ever to be attempted in independent India, the implementation of the Goods and Service Tax (GST) from the 1st of July this year. With just one more meeting, so we hope, of the GST Council scheduled to be held, and that too on Sunday 11th June, GST is as good as done. But have all the loose ends been tied up, or are there any glitches that remain? Glitches that are perhaps inevitable when we are contemplating such a momentous change in the tax structure. And if yes, what are these and how can we best tackle them to minimize the disruption to an economy that's already suffering from the after effects of demonetization? And who better to answer these questions than V.S. Krishnan, former member GST, Central Board of Excise and Customs, presently with EY, and Prakash Kumar, also a former bureaucrat but presently CEO, GSTN, Goods and Services Network, the non-profit, non-government company that's providing the IT support and services to both the central and state governments, including taxpayers and other stakeholders. In effect, it's the IT backbone for GST, without which GST would be a complete non-starter. Welcome to the show, Krishnan, Prakash.
Thank you.
Krishnan, I understand that there are a number of issues that are still pending. Example, those relating to electronic transactions, the e-way bill, anti-profiteering clause, area-based exemptions, applicability of GST to JNK, transition rules, etc. that are either fully or partly unresolved to date. So let me start by asking you, how critical is the unfinished agenda? And can you also explain these issues very briefly for the benefit of our viewers and tell us how they really impact GST? I know that's a long answer, but we have only 25 minutes. So can you try and put it all in a nutshell for us?
Yeah, Mythili, the June 11th meeting will do the following. It will first also look at some of the representations that have come on the rates previously fixed. For example, items like hybrid cars and all that, that's going to be discussed. There have been representations, so that will be discussed. The transition rules are done. They've been approved in the last meeting. JNK will pass its own act by the end of this month, which will specifically provide for charging IGST on supplies to JNK. That should take care of it will be a very special provision in the JNK Act. The anti-profiteering clause need not be operational. It could be done in the interim. What they have said is they'll create a committee of officials. They'll create a committee of officials who when they receive specific complaints, will examine, and then, a view can be taken temporarily. They're also thinking of using the Directorate of Safeguards, which is an organization under the CBEC, to do the investigation and all that. So that's something. So the anti-profiteering legislation need not be effective from the 1st of July. They can have in the interim other arrangements. The special area scheme position is also, I think, broadly now clear, and I think a final shape will be given on the 11th of June meeting, and that is that they will pay duty upfront and take a refund, which means there will be no exemption upfront. So that's, I think, so the June 11 should tie up most of the issues. The rates are done. A review of what rates were done will also be reviewed and a final view taken. And area-based exemptions will be examined, and transition rules are done. And in fact, the very interesting announcement made by the government at the last meeting was that they would treat the period after the 1st of July as a transitional period, the remaining portion of the financial year.
Which is a large part.
Which is really saying that government will have an open mind on anything. Because, you know, Mythili, law always follows practice, not the other way around, because you can't anticipate all the problems prior to implementation. You know what happened with the service tax. That as and when the events unfolded, the calibration of the rules took place.
Prakash, Krishnan seems quite optimistic really, but which of these issues worries you particularly in the GSTN? I understand a great deal of work remains to be done on the e-way bills. Until such time as that is sorted out, we'll have to live with delays, so that one of the biggest promises of GST, which is faster movement across states, will remain on paper. Am I right?
See, as far as we are concerned, our job was to create the platform for registration, return filing, and the payment of taxes, and the maintenance of all the ledgers, and then create data for settlement between states, which we provide to the Revenue Department of Government of India for settlement between center and the state. So what we have done, we created the registration form application, which we rolled out on 8th of November, on which by now 62 lakh people have already enrolled. These are the existing taxpayers out of total of 80 lakhs. And this window is still open till 15th of June. Then the return and the payment part we did, and on which we trained our master trainers, 2,000 of them, and who in turn have already trained 54,000 out of 62,000 tax officers. And that is what we were ready. And April month and May month, some changes were made based on the feedback which was received by Department of Revenue and the Council. And so those, we are making those changes so that the returns, the three main returns which will be filed by 95 to 96% people will be ready fully before the rollout.
On the specific issue of e-way bills, Prakash?
E-way bill, in fact, that's not something without which system cannot run. Currently, states have their own systems of issuing, and the council had discussed, maybe they will discuss it again on 11th, how to go about it.
Okay, so as things stand, we might have to live with some delay. But Krishnan, GST rates were finalized at the last meeting of the GST Council on 3rd June are bound to result in an even more complex structure of rates, and was envisaged under the original multi-rate structure of 5 rates, 0, 5, 12, 18 and 28 plus cess, etc. for some items. Given the political economy considerations, this was perhaps inevitable. But will we really end up with a system that's not much of an improvement over the present? Sure, many of the ills of the present system, such as cascading and the absence of a unified national market, might become history, but will we still continue to see endless disputes and lawsuits over classification, pricing and so on, particularly because pricing is a very defining line between the rates that are to be applicable?
Mythili, I remember in the last program also we had said that one of the distinctive features of the GST is that the headline rate that you see at the final stage is actually the tax incidence that will be borne by the consumer. Whereas in the pre-GST era, because of the cascading effect of tax and tax, it was very difficult to actually answer the question, what is the real incidence of tax? Sure. So there's a great transparency in taxation. Actually, when the consumer gets the invoice, the rate that he sees is actually the final rate which the product bears, sure, and is also the duty that he has debited to the government. So that's that great transparency. As far as classification disputes is concerned, the great agreement that was reached between the center and the state was to adopt the HSN at a 4-digit level initially. The states in their state VAT did not have the HSN system. Once you have a HSN system, then broadly classification disputes will not arise, because the HSN code will uniquely define that commodity by and large. So classification disputes will not take place, and the whole arbitrage between service rates and excise rates on leasing, that has been sorted out at the last meeting. They said when somebody leases a good, the leasing rate will be the same as the goods rate. So that arbitrage opportunities between leasing and the goods rate, that has been sorted out. So I think that there is still scope, in my view, to have brought more items under the 28 category to the 18 category.
Okay. Mr. Kumar, I described the GSTN as the IT backbone of the GST, but given the system's dependence on IT, it could perhaps more correctly be described as not just the IT backbone, but simply the backbone of GST. So here the biggest question is, how is the GSTN really going to tackle the sheer volume? And if you remember how systems crashed in the early days of Obamacare in the US, we know what we're up against, because we're talking here of an economy that is much less IT savvy, where many of the users perhaps never even generated invoices in the past. I understand you made a great deal of progress and you did a trial run recently, but what was your experience? And can I ask you a question? Are you getting a cold feet as we approach 1st of July? An honest answer to that.
See, first thing, something which was done by government earlier was automation of VAT across the country. I'm talking especially the states, because central government had already automated its service tax and excise. So people are used to filing returns online. That's number one. Number two, 9 states, they file invoice level data. It's not something new which is going to come. So that's the second part. The third part, you don't need to generate invoice online. You can continue with your manual invoice. What you would need is that some of the aspects of the invoice, like invoice number, purchasers GSTN, taxable amount, tax rate and tax amount. These are the things which go into that. Now we also had this challenge before us, that how do I ensure that my smallest taxpayer is able to comply with it and is able to submit this data on the portal. So we came up with a offline tool, and this works for both small taxpayers as well as areas where you don't have internet connectivity all the time, or it's not so good. So what happens here, the taxpayer, and mind you, that invoice data is only for business to business. So our large number of taxpayers who are basically retailers, they are not going to issue business to business invoices. For them, the return is just 5 lines or 6 lines, as many tax rates as you have, and that's it. It's only for the wholesaler and above who will be selling to another business, where they need to give business to business data invoice level, and they can enter this into an Excel sheet, the template we have created, and we in fact use that during our beta trial, and there is an offline tool along with that. So you can enter up to 19,000 invoices, which it can convert into a JSON file, which is just 5 MB. Now to give you an idea, 5 MB WhatsApp 1-minute video, which many of us download even in rural areas, that's the size of 19,000 invoices. Now you'll ask me, how many of them are going to generate like that? The average number of invoices from 9 states which we collected for last year was 127 per month. So it's not that big a volume, and they are used to filing online. So these two facts and the availability of this offline tool. And third and most important, they don't need to go to any GSP. In fact, there is a lots of misconception. Majority of my taxpayers will be coming directly to the portal. If they don't have any business to business sales, they have just those 6 or 7 tax rates, or whatever tax rates they are dealing with, that many, they come, just feed it and say submit.
You're not getting cold feet as 1st July approaches, certainly, right?
No, not at all. In fact, yes, it's a daunting task, and it's a big one. But the numbers what you mentioned, the 300 crores that we estimated based on these 9 states data, National Stock Exchange gets much more data than that, transaction wise.
That's true.
IRCTC get much more transaction wise, and we have designed a system where 50% of the people will file on the last day. That's the kind of hardware we have put in.
Yes, so you're aware of the fact that Indians tend to do everything at the last minute, but I'm afraid it's time for us to slip into a very short break, but please do stay with us. We'll be back very soon. Welcome back. You're watching Macros in Mythili, and I'm in discussion with V.S. Krishnan and Prakash Kumar on what remains to be done in GST, how difficult is it going to be to remove the glitches, and what can we do to best ensure that they will be as minimal as possible. Krishnan, the fact is that transitional problems are inevitable and are particularly severe in the case of pan-India services like banking, insurance, telecom that are currently required to have multiple registrations. Will allowing deemed credit to the extent of 60% for transactions that are more than 25,000 and in the 18% category be a good enough interim solution? I know you've suggested that in the case of sectors with a long supply chain, the taxable value could be taken as nil beyond a certain stage. Do you see the GST Council agreeing to that? And also, could we have come up to an alternative to the multiple registration system that we are proposing?
Yeah, Mythili, there are two different points you've raised. One is the transitional rules, and second is multiple registration. The first is as far as the transition rules, they have really fixed it at the last meeting. I think the trade is quite happy with the 60% deemed credit for higher rated items. And then they've also talked about issue of a credit transfer document. They talked about credit transfer document in which a manufacturer can actually transfer credit to the unregistered dealers as of now who get registered after GST.
Okay.
And they have said that you can give a cross reference to chassis number and engine numbers, and that would be accepted as part of the certification of duty payment if you can identify the product through some unique numbers. So I think the last meeting was significant, that most of the problems with the transition, in fact most of the credit would now be possible to be transited into the GST. That's a big relief, I think, to most of trade and industry. As far as multiple registration is concerned, I think the states were of the view that the banks and telecom and financial services should be registered, in their place, and what they are now talking of is a simplification of the compliance regime, in which you will have a single compliance verification. You look at the principal place of business of a bank, for example. That state government SGST officials and the central government officials will jointly do a compliance verification all over the country, instead of leaving it to specific state authorities. So some kind of a system is being worked out. Multiple registrations is a problem. In fact, the banks have been quite uncomfortable with that. Some of them have even said that we won't be ready by the 1st of July. So the banks have an issue, banks and insurance. I think there the case for a single registration could have been considered.
So certainly if banks are worried, I can imagine the plight of the smaller smaller retailers and traders. But Prakash, one issue that has been actually worrying a lot of people is the structure of GSTN. As a non-government special purpose vehicle in which government does not have a majority stake, it's been criticized on the grounds that matters relating to taxation, that is actually a very important domain of the sovereign, should never be put in private hands. So what really was the logic of opting for such a structure, and can taxpayers be satisfied that their interests, including data security, will not be compromised? I know the FMS said that the GSTN would be subject to CAG audit, but is that good enough? CAG audits, as we know, are more about procedures and usually come after a long delay. So how can GSTN ensure that necessary confidence amongst taxpayers and the public at large, that this is a body which is entirely above board and you do not need to have any questions or any doubts about data security, integrity, etc.?
Yeah, so it can be answered in two ways. One is how it is structured. For structural purposes only, it's a private company, but if you look at the board, there is a complete strategic control of the government. Central government controls 24.5%, they have 3 directors. State governments, they control 24.5%, they have 3 directors. 5 private financial institutions control 51%, they have only 3 directors. So the chairman is selected by center and the state together. Now that's the way, in fact, the board, and no decision can be taken unless until both representatives of center and state are there. So the way the whole thing has been structured, nothing can move unless until both the central government and the state government agree to it. Now as far as security of data is concerned, see, all our major projects are being done by private companies. Whether you look at income tax, you look at CBEC, majority of them, MCA. So here also we are a private company, but we work with our partner Infosys, and it's the same controls are there from the government side, as I explained on the board. And the security part, we have taken extensive care to have security starting from the coding to the application security to the network security, all kinds of security appliances. So the best in class security and all the encryption levels, whether the data is in transit or rest, it is encrypted. So there shouldn't be any worry. We are cognizant of the fact that there are personally identifiable information as well as information which has business value, and that's very important that it's accessible only to those who are owning it or those who have jurisdiction, meaning only the taxpayer and the tax officer who has jurisdiction over that.
Okay, that's really very heartening to hear. But Krishnan, the general belief is that while large corporates are ready, in fact you said some banks also may not be ready, so that's contrary to what many people believe. The fact is that many of the large players actually use suppliers who are quite small and they are not ready, so the supply chain will be adversely affected. Sitting in your perch in EY now, what is your sense regarding readiness of the small players? And though Mr. Kumar assures me that in fact they are coming forward to register, etc., what can we do to minimize a possible disruption to economic activity as a consequence of the small players not being ready?
Mythili, as I have said in many forums, GST is not merely a tax reform. It's going to be a massive business process reform and restructuring reform.
Okay.
So most of the large companies are looking at streamlining their vendors. There may be a reduction in the number of vendors that they use. They are also looking at having vendors who will get registered. They've interacted with them, because there is a downside to having a vendor who is within the exemption because he can't pass on the credit. So there's going to be a massive restructuring exercise, and the bigger companies are well prepared. They've been at it for a long time, and they've done a huge restructuring exercise, and their vendor chain would look very different after the implementation of the GST. So there's going to be a lot of change, but hopefully, as Schumpeter said, is a gale of creative destruction.
And the fact is that it's always a small, whether it's a small supplier or the small man who's at the bottom of the food chain. But Prakash, how much progress have you really made in registering taxpayers? And also, has the pace of registration been the same across taxpayers, big and small, across the states? What is the kind of response you've had from smaller players for whom all this is both new as also irksome?
We enable any taxpayer to check whether their vendors are already enrolled or not. So a large player who's buying supplies from smaller ones, he can go to the portal and enter their VAT or service tax TIN and check. So this will be provided based on industry feedback, and this has been very useful for large companies who are buying from smaller ones. So that they want to, and they can ensure that the entire vendor chain supplying to them are online. That's number one. I mean registered. Whereas I have my total domain is only 8 million. Those who are currently registered under VAT, service tax and central excise. Now out of 8 million, 6.2 million have already enrolled with us, and that process is going on, and it will continue even after 1st of January, because strictly speaking, a person can even register under VAT on 30th of June, because if he crosses the limit, he has to register. So we will keep it alive, this enrollment, after 1st July, and also for the new registrants.
Krishnan, as we go into the last leg of GST, what are your biggest worries? And how much time do you think it will take for us to get over these teething troubles? 6 months, a year, more? Very quickly.
Mythili, I think as I mentioned, it's the whole the technology side. You know, each one will have to get used to filing a return. They need to be. I mean, this whole system of GSTN is highly interactive. It's not like your a system where you just dump your return and that's it. This is an interactive system, and there are huge pluses in this. And there's going to be a learning process, and this has happened earlier when bank computerization was being considered. There was absolute chaos all over the place, and they said we ruined and all that. This is a wonderfully good exercise, good for the country. And as Prakash mentioned, online filing, fortunately, is not new. For example, in the central excise, more than 95% of the duties, there's e-payment. So there's already been a lot of work done in the last 3-4 years, both in the states and the center, which makes this task easier. Sometimes, in the media, there is a suggestion that, we are actually starting from zero. We are not. Okay. Lot of work has been done. People are used to filing online. It's just that they've got to get used to an interactive thing. There may be a push of formalization which may take place, because many people who are now in the informal sector may find it profitable to actually pay duty, especially the ancillary units. So you'll find a lot of people wanting to pay duty because the buyer wants to take credit.
Oh, sure. And as a taxpayer myself, I couldn't be more happy to hear that. But clearly, Prakash, ultimately, Krishnan says it all comes down to technology once again. So what is your best guess? He didn't give me a number, 6 months, 1 year, longer. What is your best guess, Prakash, before teething troubles finally get cleared up?
Yeah, anything of this size, there will be some teething trouble. And people, as Mr. Krishnan says, they will learn to work with this interactive system. I would like to just take half a minute to explain. Today you just file your return with your purchase and your sales, and then it is taken up for matching wherever it is being done much later. Here you are filing your supplies, and the system makes immediately converts into purchase for your counterpart. That's number one. Number two, when you upload your invoice, it checks whether there are duplicates in that, as well as in all the returns which have been filed earlier. Now, lots of validation is done then and there before it gets subsumed or taken care by the system. So people will, they will take certain time to get used to it. And what we have done, this entire training process we have conducted online. So in fact, those 62,000 tax officers have been trained online. And what we have requested, and they are already doing it outreach, where they show it live to the trade association and industry association. This is how it works. This is how you will upload. This is how you will see your counterparty's invoice data or return data. So that's very, very important, so that people see and they say, okay, it's not so different from what I do for my banking operation or for when I file my income tax return and I see my Form 26As. What Form 26As is basically GSTR 2A, or the TDS return part which comes into your inward receipt return.
That's entirely true. But given the enormity of what we're attempting, I think this discussion could go on and on, but I'm afraid I've run out of time completely. So I'll have to end this discussion now. Thank you so much, Krishnan and Prakash, for joining me and enlightening our viewers about some of the complexities of GST as we go into the last lap. And to you, Prakash, all the very best. I think the atmosphere in the GSTN must be something like what it is in the ISRO office, just before the launch of a satellite. But thank you very much for joining us. Thank you also for watching. Remember, we'll be back next week with yet another edition of Macros with Mythili. Till then, it's thank you and goodbye from all of us at ET Now. In the meanwhile, if there's any issue that you'd like to see discussed in this program, please do write into us at the email ID you see at the bottom of your screen.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/ETNow.